My name is Marie Wolfe, and I'm 22 years old, a private first class in the United States Army. At exactly 2 a.m., I was lying on a cold marble floor, blood pooling from a gash on my head. The tibia in my right leg snapped at an angle I'd only ever seen in combat medic training manuals. The pain was biblical. But it was nothing compared to watching my mother, Eleanor, simply stand there and smooth out the wrinkles in her evening gown. She looked down at me, then over to her politician husband and said, "Clean this up, Marcus. The donors will be here in an hour." "Mom," I rasped. She knelt, her eyes like chips of ice. "You should have signed the papers. Marcus's career is more important." But that wasn't the worst of it. She leaned close to my ear, whispering a terrible secret about my father, Captain David Wolfe, a secret that changed everything. Before I continue my story, please hit the like and subscribe button if you're watching this video. Let me know where you're from in the comments below. The command, "Clean this up," still hung in the air, colder than the Italian marble pressing against my cheek. My mother, Eleanor, didn't move away after her dismissal. Instead, she lowered herself, the silk of her emerald green gown rustling like dry leaves. The scent of her perfume, an expensive and overpowering cloud of Tom Ford's black orchid, filled my senses, mixing with the metallic tang of my own blood. It was the scent I associated with charity galas and political fundraisers, the smell of her new life. Now, it would forever be the smell of betrayal. Her face was inches from mine, a perfectly preserved mask of Northern Virginia high society. But her voice, when it came, was a venomous hiss, for my ears only. "You always worshipped your father like a saint, didn't you, Marie?" I tried to shake my head, a futile gesture that sent a fresh wave of agony through my skull. A low groan escaped my lips. The sharp, grinding pain from my leg was a constant screaming signal, but her words were beginning to eclipse it. "Did you ever wonder what he really did over there?" she continued, her breath warm and foul against my skin. "You're Captain David Wolfe, your hero." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting me drown in it. "He wasn't the hero you think he was. He was just as selfish as any other man. That trust fund he left you, that memorial fund you're so proud of." Her eyes narrowed, and in them, I saw a flicker of something truly evil. Triumph. "That was his penance money," she whispered, the words landing like precise, surgical strikes. "Penance for what he did to your grandmother and me." Each word was a new fracture, not in my bones, but in the very foundation of my soul. Penance money. The two words echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of my mind, shattering everything I'd ever held sacred. For a moment, the physical pain vanished, replaced by a horrifying, hollow coldness that spread from my chest outwards. My world didn't just crack, it atomized. Captain David Wolfe, the man who taught me how to read a compass and how to stand at attention. The man whose dress blues hung in a protected garment bag in my childhood closet like a holy relic. The man whose framed photo, the one of him awarding me my first sharpshooter badge, sat on my nightstand at the barracks. That man, my North Star, my definition of honor, was suddenly gone. In his place was a stranger, a ghost shrouded in the ugly words of my own mother. Penance for what? What did he do? The question screamed inside my head, but I had no voice to ask it. My gaze drifted past my mother's triumphant face to Marcus. He stood by the grand fireplace, completely unfazed by the broken body of his stepdaughter on his floor. His attention was on his phone. He wasn't calling for an ambulance. He was making a different kind of call. "Yeah, it's Thorne," he said, his voice low and controlled, the voice he used with lobbyists and senators. "We have a situation here at the house. A family matter. I need it handled quietly." "Yes, a domestic disturbance. She had an episode. Unstable. We'll need to manage the narrative." He didn't even know. He had no idea that his wife, in a single act of casual cruelty, had just detonated a bomb far more destructive than a simple, brutal assault. He thought this was about money, about me refusing to sign away my inheritance to fund his next campaign. He was wrong. My mother hadn't just broken my body, she was trying to annihilate my spirit, She was trying to salt the earth of my past so that nothing could ever grow there again. And that was her mistake. Because in that moment of absolute desolation, with the hero of my life dead for a second time, something else flickered to life inside me. It wasn't hope. It was something harder, colder. It was the instinct of a soldier. My training took over, a calm, clear voice cutting through the fog of pain and shock. Assess the situation, identify the threat, neutralize or aggress. The threats were standing right over me. Egress was not an option. That left one path. If everything I believed in was a lie, then I had nothing left to lose. And a soldier with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person on the battlefield. I had to live. I had to know the truth. With the last of my strength, I forced my left hand, the one not pinned beneath me, to move. The rough denim of my jeans scraped against my skin as my fingers fumbled for my pocket. My phone was still there. My fingers, slick with a mixture of sweat and blood, trembled as they closed around it. I dragged it out, the screen hidden from their view. I didn't need to see it. 3 numbers were burned into my muscle memory. 911. My thumb pressed the final digit. I couldn't speak. I could only hold the phone close to my mouth and let out a series of ragged, desperate breaths, hoping the dispatcher on the other end would understand, hoping they could trace the call. It was a Hail Mary, but it was enough. That call wasn't just to save my life. It was the first shot fired in a war they didn't even know I had declared. The effect was almost immediate. Faintly, from miles away, a sound began to cut through the night. A siren, getting closer, louder. Marcus's head snapped up. His smug political mask melted away, replaced by raw panic. "What did you do?" he hissed, his eyes locking onto the phone in my hand. "You bitch!" He lunged for it, but it was too late. The sound was undeniable now, a piercing wail splitting the manicured silence of our wealthy Virginia suburb. Eleanor stood frozen, her face a ghastly shade of white. The mastermind who had everything planned, the woman who had just tried to poison her own daughter's soul, had made a critical miscalculation. She had underestimated her target. She didn't understand that when you corner a wolf, it doesn't die quietly. It bites back. The flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser swept through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the room in frantic strokes of color. They danced across their horrified faces, illuminating their shock, their fear, their absolute ruin. It was the last thing I saw before the darkness finally took me, and in that darkness, a new image formed. Not my mother's face, not Marcus's. It was my father's face, smiling from an old photograph. But now a shadow was creeping across it, a dark stain of doubt, turning the face of my hero into the face of a stranger. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and bleach, a sterile scent that could only belong to a military hospital. My world was a landscape of white. White sheets, white walls, white ceiling tiles. A dull, throbbing ache radiated from my right leg, which was encased in a heavy plaster cast and suspended in the air by a web of pulleys and weights. It was a clean, manageable pain. Distant. Nothing compared to the storm raging inside my head. The physical injuries were a footnote. The real wound was the one left by my mother's whisper. Penance money. The words played on a loop, a ghost in the machine of my mind. They had followed me from the cold marble floor into the sterile silence of this room at Walter Reed. My eyes drifted to the wall opposite my bed. Someone, probably a well-meaning nurse, had taped up a photograph there. It was from the day I graduated from basic training at Fort Jackson. My dad was hugging me, his arms strong around my shoulders, his face beaming with a pride so bright it felt like it could light up the world. I was grinning, my face flushed with exhaustion and triumph, my uniform still stiff and new. For years, that photograph had been my proof of worth, my touchstone. Now, staring at it, I saw something different. I saw a stranger wearing my father's face. The pride in his eyes now seemed practiced. The smile on his lips felt like a carefully constructed mask. Was it real? Or was he hiding something behind that perfect, heroic facade? The question was a poison, seeping backward in time, tainting every memory I held dear. The archive of my life was being corrupted, one precious file at a time. My mind drifted away from the sterile room, floating back to a cool autumn morning on Shenandoah Lake. It was our last fishing trip, just a few weeks before his final deployment. I remembered the gentle rocking of the John boat, the crisp Blue Ridge mountain air filling my lungs, the mist curling off the water's surface like smoke. He was teaching me how to bait a hook with a live worm, his large calloused hands surprisingly gentle. He called me Joe, his old Army nickname for me. "Patience, Joe," he'd said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. Sometimes the biggest fish are hiding in the deepest, darkest spots, the ones you gotta work for. At the time, I thought he was just talking about largemouth bass. I thought it was a simple lesson in fishing, in life. Now his words took on a sinister new meaning. Was he talking about himself? Was he trying to tell me that his own depths held a darkness I couldn't see? The memory, once a source of warmth and comfort, now felt like a cryptic warning I had failed to understand. What kind of monster hides in the deepest, darkest part of a man you call your hero? And the letters. I closed my eyes, trying to recall them. Piles of them, sent from dusty FOBs in Afghanistan. The paper thin and worn from the journey. They smelled of sand and the faint, sweet scent of the pipe tobacco he used to smoke. For the most part, they were filled with love and encouragement, advice on my training, questions about my mother. Keep your head down and your spirits up, Joe. Make me proud. But as I sifted through the memories, I focused on the last few. The tone had shifted, hadn't it? It was subtle, something I'd dismissed at the time as combat fatigue. The handwriting was a little less steady. The words were heavier, wearier. There was a sense of remorse. A thread of apology woven through the usual fatherly advice. One line, from his very last letter, now screamed at me from the past. There are things a man does for his country, and things he has to live with for himself. I hope you'll understand someday. My mother and I had read that line together in our quiet kitchen. She had sighed and said, "The war is taking its toll on him." We had both chalked it up to the crushing weight of command. But were we wrong? Were we so blinded by our adoration for Captain David Wolfe, the hero, that we missed the confession of David Wolfe, the man? Was he trying to prepare us for a truth he never got the chance to tell? Then my thoughts turned to her, my mother, Eleanor Wolfe Thorne. I conjured the image of her at my father's funeral at Arlington. She stood so tall, a pillar of dignified grief in a black dress, accepting the folded American flag from the honor guard. Her stoicism was legendary. She was the perfect Gold Star widow, an icon of strength and grace for the entire military community. Everyone admired her. I admired her. How could that woman, the woman who bore her grief with such profound honor, be the same creature who stood over my broken body and smoothed her dress? The same monster who used my father's memory as a weapon to destroy me? Which one was the mask? The grieving widow or the cold-hearted socialite? Was her whisper the bitter truth, a secret she had carried for years? Or was it just another lie, a piece of ammunition carefully chosen to manipulate me into signing those papers for Marcus? I was trapped between two realities, two versions of the parents I thought I knew. I was adrift in a sea of broken memories, with no land in sight. Everything was a question. Nothing was certain. I realized then, with a chilling clarity, that before I could ever fight Marcus and his lies, I had to fight a much harder battle. I had to fight the ghosts that now haunted my own past. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. A Navy corpsman, a young woman with kind eyes, came in to check my vitals. She smiled gently as she adjusted my IV drip. "You're a tough one, Private," she said softly. "Took a real beating, but you're stable. You're strong, a real fighter." Her words were meant to be a comfort, a compliment, but they landed like a punch to the gut. A fighter? I thought, as she bustled out of the room, leaving me alone with the silence again. I don't even know what I'm fighting for anymore. The question lingered long after the corpsman left. What am I fighting for? In the days that followed, the answer became brutally clear. I was fighting for my own sanity, on a battlefield far more insidious than any I had trained for. While my leg was slowly healing in the sterile confines of Walter Reed, Marcus Thorne had launched a second offensive. It started with the DC tabloids. Anonymous sources close to the family began feeding them a carefully crafted narrative. I'd be scrolling through the news on my phone, and there it would be, a headline designed to plant a seed of doubt. Politico's stepdaughter in disturbed home incident. They never printed outright lies, just poisonous suggestions. They painted a picture of a troubled young soldier, struggling with the psychological aftermath of service, who had overreacted during a heated family dispute over finances. They called me the unstable daughter. Marcus, of course, was portrayed as the patient stepfather, trying to get her the help she needs. He was weaponizing my service against me, twisting the uniform I wore with honor into a symbol of mental instability. Every sacrifice I'd endured for my country was now being used as evidence to discredit me. Then came the legal battle. It was a slow, grinding war of attrition. Marcus's high-priced lawyers filed motion after motion to delay the proceedings. Their primary tactic was to attack my credibility, filing a formal request for a full psychiatric evaluation. They wanted to put my mind on trial, not my stepfather's actions. The interviews with the detectives were the worst. There was a subtle, corrosive skepticism in their questions. One of them, a detective with tired eyes, leaned forward in the uncomfortable hospital chair. "Ms. Wolfe," he said, calling me Ms. instead of private, subtly stripping me of my military identity. "In your statement, you said the argument was escalating. Why didn't you just leave?" I stared at him, my throat tight. It was my home. Where was I supposed to go? "You've had combat training, correct?" Another detective chimed in. "How did you end up with such a severe injury if you're a trained soldier?" They didn't get it. They couldn't understand that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one you see coming from a mile away. It's the one who has shared meals with you. Their questions, laced with victim blaming, made me feel like I was the one who had done something wrong. The system's cold indifference was a second assault. My days fell into a grueling routine. Physical therapy was a special kind of hell. The PT room was a large open space filled with the sounds of grunts, weights clanking, and the quiet, determined hum of soldiers trying to piece their bodies back together. It was a room full of heroes. Marines who had lost limbs to IEDs, Rangers who had fallen from Black Hawks. Their wounds were visible, tangible marks of sacrifice. They were honored. My wound came from betrayal. It was hidden under a cast, a shameful secret in a room full of valor. I felt like an imposter. I would watch as other soldiers were visited by their families. Mothers would bring Tupperware containers filled with homemade food, spicy Louisiana gumbo that filled the room with its savory aroma, or a warm apple pie. They would sit for hours, talking, laughing, providing a comfort that no amount of morphine could replicate. And then there was me. Alone on the parallel bars, learning how to walk again on crutches. Each clumsy, painful step was a reminder of that night, of my mother's cold eyes, of my utter isolation. My family wasn't bringing me comfort. They were the IED. It was in that profound loneliness that a different kind of fight began. An investigation. If the system wouldn't find the truth, I would. I started with my father's old unit, calling the men he had served with, their numbers pulled from an old address book. The first few calls were dead ends. Most were polite but distant, making it clear they didn't want to get involved in a messy family drama involving a powerful politician. But I kept dialing. Finally, I reached a name near the bottom of the list, Frank Miller, a retired master sergeant who had been my father's platoon sergeant for years. His voice was gravelly and cautious. "Marie, your dad was a good man," he said. "But some things that happen in a war zone, they're best left there. People back home can't ever understand." "I'm not people back home, Master Sergeant," I said, my voice steady. "I'm a soldier, and his daughter, and they're trying to destroy his name. Please, I just need to understand." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him take a long, slow drag from a cigarette. "Your father was a hero, Marie. Don't you ever doubt that," he finally exhaled. "But There was a mission. In Kandahar province. It went sideways, bad intel. It changed him. He wouldn't say more, but he had given me something. It wasn't an answer, but it was a breadcrumb. A single word to cling to in the darkness. Kandahar. A place on a map, thousands of miles away. A starting point in the dark, forgotten history of the man I called my father. That night, alone in my room, the weight of it all, the media, the lawyers, the loneliness, this new, frightening mystery, it almost broke me. It's a heavy burden, fighting for the truth when it feels like the whole world has already decided you're a liar. If you've ever felt like you had to fight a battle all by yourself, please support this story by hitting the like button. And in the comments, just type one word, Kandahar. Let them know we're going to find out what happened there, together. I leaned my head back against the thin hospital pillow, my body aching and my spirit worn thin. I was so tired of fighting. I glanced around the empty room, my eyes landing on a generic motivational poster taped to the wall. It had a picture of a mountain at sunrise, but it was the quote underneath that caught me. Words from a writer named Brené Brown. Vulnerability is not weakness, it read. It's our greatest measure of courage. I stared at the words, letting them sink in. Courage. Maybe the fight wasn't about being strong. Maybe it was about having the courage to be broken and to keep going anyway. It wasn't much, but it was a flicker of light. And right then, a flicker of light was all I had. The words on that poster stayed with me, a quiet hum in the back of my mind. Vulnerability is not weakness. It was a novel concept, a complete reversal of everything I'd been taught in the army, where strength was the only currency that mattered. I was contemplating this when the door to my hospital room opened without a knock. A woman with a shock of vibrant red hair and eyes as sharp as an eagle's stood in the doorway. She wasn't a doctor or a nurse. She carried a worn leather briefcase instead of a clipboard, and her tailored blazer meant business. "Private First Class Wolf?" she asked, her voice clear and direct. I nodded slowly. "My name is Jessica Riley. I'm with the Veterans Consortium." She walked in, placing her briefcase on the visitor's chair with a decisive thud. "I read about your situation in the papers," she said, her expression somewhere between irritated and amused. "Those garbage articles. I spent 10 years as a JAG officer. I can smell political maneuvering from a mile away." For the first time in weeks, someone looked at me without pity or suspicion. They didn't see a broken victim or an unstable soldier. Jessica Riley looked at me and saw a case. She saw a fight. It was the most comforting thing I'd felt in a long time. "I'm here to offer our services pro bono," she continued, opening her briefcase. "That is, if you want to fight back. And from what I've read between the lines of that trash, my gut tells me you do. Hope is a dangerous thing when you have none." It felt like a trick. "Why?" I asked, my voice raspy from disuse. "Why would you help me?" Jessica paused, her sharp gaze softening for just a fraction of a second. "Because I've seen men like Marcus Thorne my entire career. Men who wrap themselves in the flag while they abuse the very people sworn to protect it. And because no soldier should ever have to fight a battle on the home front alone." So I told her everything. The words came spilling out, a torrent of pain and confusion I'd held inside for too long. I told her about the argument, the assault, Marcus's calm phone call to his fixer. And then, my voice dropping to a near whisper, I told her about my mother. I told her the secret Eleanor had hissed into my ear, the terrible poison about my father being selfish, about his legacy being built on penance money. I braced myself for the inevitable skepticism, for the gentle questions about whether I might have misheard or if the trauma had confused me. It's what the detectives had implied. It's what I had started to fear myself. But Jessica just listened. She didn't interrupt. She nodded, her pen scratching across a yellow legal pad, capturing the details of my nightmare. When I finished, the room was heavy with silence. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, afraid of what I might see in her eyes. She reached across the small table and gently tapped my hand. I flinched, but then looked up. She was looking right at me, her expression unyielding. "I believe you," she said. 3 words. That's all it took. 3 simple words that did what no amount of physical therapy or painkillers could. They began to set the fractured pieces of my spirit back into place. A wall of ice I didn't even know I had built around my heart cracked and then shattered. The tears I had refused to shed, the tears I had deemed a weakness, finally came. They weren't tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Jessica became more than my lawyer. In the days that followed, she became my lifeline. She became the big sister I never had, the commanding officer I desperately needed. She brought me case files to read instead of celebrity magazines. She brought me actual decent coffee from a local shop in Bethesda, not the lukewarm dishwater the hospital served. She'd show up with a pink box of donuts, and we'd sit there, going over the details of my case, the smell of fresh coffee and glazed sugar filling the sterile room. She told me about the Brené Brown quote on the poster. She explained that vulnerability wasn't about being weak, but about having the courage to show up and be seen when you have no control over the outcome. For the first time, I felt seen. Through Jessica, I learned that the Veterans Consortium was more than just a legal aid society. It was a network, a hidden brotherhood and sisterhood of survivors. She told me about other cases she'd handled. A Marine sergeant fighting for custody of his kids against an abusive wife with political connections, an Air Force captain whose CO was trying to bury her sexual harassment claim. I wasn't an anomaly. I was part of a tribe I never knew existed. They were my new family, a family forged in adversity, not blood. One afternoon, Jessica came in with a whiteboard she'd borrowed from a conference room. "All right, Marie," she said, her tone shifting from supportive friend to sharp as a tack lawyer. "Marcus is playing a political chess game. He's using the media to frame the narrative before this ever sees a courtroom." She uncapped a black dry erase marker. "So, we don't play his game. We don't react. We attack." She drew a diagram on the board. On one side, she wrote, "The assault." On the other, "Kandahar." "The assault charge is our opening move. It's straightforward, but his lawyers will try to bog it down by questioning your mental state," she explained, tapping the board. "The real checkmate is here." She circled Kandahar. "Whatever your mother was talking about, whatever secret your father was keeping, Marcus knows about it. Or he thinks he knows. People like him don't build their lives on solid ground. They build them on secrets and leverage. Your father's secret is his leverage over your mother. It's the key. If we can find out what he's so desperate to keep hidden, his entire house of cards comes tumbling down." For the first time since I woke up in this hospital, I felt a surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with pain or fear. It was hope. Raw, powerful, and focused. I looked at Jessica, at the battle plan sketched out on the whiteboard, and I felt the shift deep in my bones. I was no longer a victim lying broken on the floor. I was a soldier, preparing for battle. Jessica packed up her briefcase, a satisfied smile on her face. As she stood in the doorway, ready to leave, she turned back to me. "They thought you would stay silent, Marie," she said, her voice dropping, filled with a cold, hard resolve. "It's time we show them what a real soldier does when she's cornered. They started this war, but we are going to finish it." Jessica's words became my armor. They started this war, but we are going to finish it. I repeated them to myself like a mantra, a new creed for this new, unfamiliar war. I needed them because a few days later, the enemy launched a psychological assault. I was in the physical therapy room, sweating through a painful series of leg lifts when I saw her. My mother. She wasn't supposed to be here. Walter Reed had strict visitor protocols. But the rules, I was learning, didn't apply to the wife of a powerful politician. She wasn't alone. Trailing behind her at a respectful distance were 2 people in dark suits, a man and a woman, both carrying briefcases, her legal team. Eleanor herself looked immaculate, dressed in a cream-colored St. John suit with her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. She looked less like she was visiting her injured daughter and more like she was attending a DC charity luncheon. In her hands, she carried a white bakery box tied with a simple string. As she approached, a familiar, cloyingly sweet scent wafted towards me: cinnamon, toasted pecans, and butter. My stomach clenched. "I brought you your favorite," she said, her voice smooth as silk, as if the last time we'd spoken hadn't involved me bleeding on her floor. Homemade pecan pie. That smell, once the scent of holidays and comfort, now smelled like poison. It was a calculated move, a weaponized piece of my childhood deployed to soften the beachhead before the main invasion. My physical therapist, a no-nonsense army captain, took one look at the entourage and discreetly led me to a private consultation room. We sat across from each other at a small, sterile table. Eleanor placed the pie between us like a peace offering. She didn't ask about my leg. She didn't mention the cast, the crutches, or the pain that was a constant fire just beneath my skin. Instead, she began to talk about the future of our family. She spoke of how stressed Marcus had been, how this whole unfortunate incident was just a terrible misunderstanding. She talked about the mistakes that everyone makes. She was gaslighting me, trying to rewrite history, to paint a picture of a normal family spat that had simply gotten out of hand. I stayed silent, my hands clasped in my lap, letting her spin her web of lies. This wasn't my mother. This was Marcus's ambassador. Then came the offer. The real reason for her visit. Marcus is prepared to be very generous, Marie, she said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. If you agree to drop this lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement, he will not only cover all your medical expenses, but he will also enroll you in a top-tier residential therapy program, somewhere quiet in the countryside. And of course, there will be a substantial financial settlement to compensate you for your trouble. She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hand reaching for mine across the table. Think of it, darling, she cooed. This can all go away. Everything can go back to how it was. We can be a family again. A family. The word was obscene coming from her lips. I pulled my hand back, tucking it safely under the table. The armor of Jessica's words held firm. I was no longer the confused, heartbroken girl in the hospital bed. I was a soldier, and I recognized the tactic. She was probing my defenses, looking for a weakness. I looked her directly in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let the rage I felt show. I simply asked one quiet question. What's the secret in Kandahar? The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of the concerned mother didn't just crack, it vaporized. The warm, gentle smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard line. Her eyes, which had been feigning sympathy, turned to chips of flint. This was the real Eleanor, the one I'd seen on the night of the attack. I have no idea what you're talking about, she snapped, her voice as sharp and brittle as breaking glass. That lawyer of yours is filling your head with nonsense. You are selfishly tearing this family apart over nothing. There it was, the pivot. When seduction failed, she defaulted to blame. She had played her hand, and I had refused to fold. I had seen the monster behind the mask, and now she knew I had seen it. The meeting was over. Her lawyer, the man in the suit, stepped forward as if on cue. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my mother, seeing her for who she truly was. A woman so terrified of losing her status, her security, that she would sacrifice her own daughter to protect it. She stood to leave, gathering her purse and her composure. At the door, she paused and turned back, her face a carefully arranged portrait of disappointment. Your father would be so disappointed in you, Marie, she said, her voice dripping with false sorrow. He was a man who valued family above all else. He always wanted to protect us. She let the words hang in the air for a moment. Don't do something you'll live to regret. It wasn't advice. It was a threat. A final, desperate volley using the most powerful weapon in her arsenal, the memory of my father. She was holding his legacy hostage, warning me that if I continued, I would be the one to destroy it. She and her entourage swept out, leaving the unopened box of pecan pie on the table. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. The sweet smell of the pie now seemed rancid, a symbol of a love that was rotten to the core. But I wasn't afraid. I wasn't hurt. The ice in my veins had been replaced by a slow-burning fire. She thought she was warning me, but all she had done was confirm what Jessica and I already suspected. Kandahar wasn't nothing. It was everything. And they were terrified of me finding out what it was. The pecan pie remained on the table, a monument to my mother's failed mission. I had a nurse throw it away. I knew the fight wasn't over, but I thought I would at least have a moment of peace. I was wrong. The next morning, a package arrived from a courier. It was a small, unassuming cardboard box with my mother's elegant handwriting on the label. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was Barnaby. He was a threadbare teddy bear, a gift from my father before his last deployment. His fur was worn down to the nub in places, one of his button eyes was missing, and his stitched smile was crooked. He was the most precious thing I owned. He was my last tangible link to the man who was my hero. I lifted him out. And then I saw it. A dark, ugly stain marring the faded brown fur of his belly. It was a rusty, reddish-brown color. I knew instantly what it was. Blood. My blood. From the night on the marble floor. She had taken him. She had deliberately dipped this sacred object of my childhood into the evidence of her own crime. My stomach turned with a violent wave of nausea and disgust. Tucked under his arm was a small cream-colored note card, the kind my mother used for thank you letters. In her perfect looping cursive, she had written 5 words. Don't destroy what's left of him. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a reminder. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. She was desecrating a sacred memory to threaten me. A cold, clean rage, unlike anything I'd ever felt before, began to build in my chest. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Jessica. Her voice was all business, stripped of its usual warmth. Marie, I just got a call from a contact at the Pentagon, she said, her tone grim. Senator Thorne's office has filed a formal inquiry with the Department of the Army. They're requesting a review of your medical and service records, citing concerns for the psychological stability of an active duty soldier. I went numb. The teddy bear felt heavy in my hands, a profane idol. This was his final assault. He wasn't just trying to win in court, he was trying to erase me. He was going after the one thing I had left that was truly mine, my career, my honor, my identity as a soldier in the United States Army. He wanted to have me declared mentally unfit, a damaged veteran, so that no one, not a jury, not the press, not my own command, would ever believe a word I said. It was a kill shot, aimed directly at my soul. I stood there, in the silence of my hospital room, the blood-stained bear in one hand and the phone in the other. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not in a frantic, out-of-control way. It was a clean, sharp break. The fear, the pain, the doubt, the grief that had been my constant companions for weeks, they all evaporated. All that remained was a chilling, absolute clarity. The words came to me then, unbidden, echoing in my mind as clearly as if they were being called out on a parade ground. The words I had spoken with a raised right hand when I was 18 years old. The oath of enlistment. Will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Domestic. The word struck me like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne. A man who used his power to silence and abuse. A man who hid his corruption behind a flag pin and patriotic speeches. He wasn't just my stepfather. He was a domestic enemy. He was a threat to the very principles of honor, truth, and justice that my father and now I had sworn to defend. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a matter of duty. Jessica, stay on the line, I said, my voice low and even. With my free hand, I pulled up my contacts and found his private number. My thumb was rock steady as I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice oozing a smug, condescending concern. Marie, I'm glad you called. I hope you've had time to think things over. I cut him off. There was no rage in my voice, only ice. Listen to me very carefully, Senator, I said. The title was a deliberate choice, a weapon to establish the new terms of our engagement. You just made a fatal mistake. There was a surprised silence on his end. I continued, my words measured and precise, each one a perfectly aimed shot. You attacked a soldier of the United States Army. You defiled the legacy of a fallen officer to blackmail his daughter. This was never about the money, and you know it. This is about honor. And I swear to you, on the memory of the man you are trying to tarnish, that I will use everything I have and everything I am to expose you for exactly what you are." I paused, letting the weight of my promise settle in the silence. The game is over. And before he could form a single syllable of a reply, I ended the call. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a wild, exhilarating sense of liberation. The line had been drawn. The battle was joined. I had made my stand. If you believe that a soldier's honor is worth fighting for, hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to write the 2 words that changed everything for me. Domestic enemy. Let's show them we're not backing down. I immediately switched the call back to Jessica. My voice was calm, my mind clear for the first time in weeks. The path ahead was dark and dangerous, but for the first time, I could see it. "Jessica," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "It's time, no more defense. Tell me what I need to do." My call with Jessica after I'd hung up on Marcus was short and to the point. The rage from that moment had cooled, solidifying into something much more useful. Purpose. Jessica's law office in downtown DC became our war room. My physical therapy was progressing, and I could now get around on crutches well enough to spend my days there, amidst towers of law books and the constant hum of the city. One entire wall of her office was a large whiteboard. It soon became a chaotic map of our strategy, covered in timelines, names, and arrows drawn in red and black marker. "Marcus is too smart to leave a clean paper trail on his finances," Jessica said one afternoon, tapping the board with a pen. "He's a politician. He knows how to hide money. Our weapon isn't in his bank records, it's in your father's past." Our primary offensive was codenamed Operation FOIA. Following Jessica's expert guidance, we filed a formal request under the Freedom of Information Act. It was a long shot. These requests could get buried in bureaucratic red tape for months, even years. But we were specific, targeting all unredacted documents, communications, and after-action reports related to a single mission. Operation Broken Falcon, which took place in the Panjwai district of Kandahar province, Afghanistan, during my father's command. We needed a truth powerful enough to shatter the pristine image Marcus had built for himself. While we waited for the wheels of government to grind, I focused on the human element. I went to find Master Sergeant Frank Miller. I met him at a VFW post in a quiet, working-class suburb in Maryland. The place smelled of stale beer, fried food, and old memories. The air was thick with the ghosts of forgotten wars. Frank was sitting alone at the bar, nursing a Coors Light, his eyes fixed on the muted baseball game playing on the overhead TV. He looked older than I remembered, the years having carved deep lines into his face. At first, he shut me down. "Some things are better left buried, kid," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He wouldn't look at me, keeping his gaze locked on the television. "That's the price of it." I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just slid a photo across the bar towards him. It was a worn picture of him and my dad, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning in front of a dusty Humvee somewhere in the desert. 2 young men a lifetime ago. "He thought of you as a brother, Sergeant," I said quietly. "And now my mother and her new husband are using a secret from that time to destroy everything he was, to destroy me. I'm not asking you to betray the army. I'm asking you to help me protect a soldier's honor." He stared at the photo for a long time. Finally, he sighed, a heavy rattling sound, and turned away from the TV. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "Your father was a hero, Marie. Don't you ever for 1 second doubt that," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "But heroes are still men, and men make mistakes." He told me about Operation Broken Falcon. It was supposed to be a simple raid on a suspected Taliban safe house. But the intel was bad. The house wasn't a safe house. It was a farmhouse. A mistake in the chain of command, a miscommunication from higher up led to a civilian casualty incident. A bad one. An entire family, parents, children, was caught in the crossfire. Wiped out. "It wasn't your dad's order," Frank said, his eyes distant. "But it was his command. His responsibility. And that weight? It broke something in him. He spent the rest of his tour trying to make it right, quietly, using his own pay to help what was left of that family's village. My mother's words echoed in my head. Selfish, penance money. She had twisted his private act of atonement into a selfish betrayal against her. The truth was so much more painful and so much more noble than her vicious lie. The fund, I whispered, the realization dawning on me. The memorial fund he left me. It wasn't penance for leaving us. It was for them. Frank just nodded slowly, his eyes sad. He told me there was a young specialist in their unit, a communications guy who had documented the entire incident on a personal hard drive. Interviews, photos, the works. The kid was later honorably discharged, shaken by what he'd seen. And then Frank gave me the final piece of the puzzle. The piece that connected the past to the present. This specialist, after he got out, he did a stint in private security to make ends meet, Frank said, taking a final swallow of his beer. He worked on the security detail for some up-and-coming local politician in Northern Virginia. He paused, looking me straight in the eye. A guy named Marcus Thorne. The air left my lungs. The noisy VFW hall seemed to go silent. An icy chill spread through my body, cold and sharp. It all clicked into place. The young soldier, burdened by a terrible secret, gets a job and, maybe in a moment of weakness or misplaced trust, confides in his charismatic new boss. Marcus knew. He didn't just suspect. He knew everything. He had been holding this information, this terrible, tragic secret from the very beginning. He had used it to control my mother, to bend her to his will. He had married a Gold Star widow, not out of love, but for the political capital, all while holding the weapon that could destroy her hero's legacy. My grief for my father was suddenly eclipsed by a white-hot, focused rage. He wasn't a flawed hero. He was a good man who had been haunted. And Marcus Thorne had taken that haunting, that private pain, and twisted it into a tool for his own ambition. A week later, I got a call from Jessica. Her voice was electric. Marie, you're not going to believe this. Our FOIA request, it was fast-tracked. Someone from inside the Pentagon pushed it through. That evening, she came to my small, temporary apartment near the hospital. She was holding a single black USB flash drive. Here it is, Marie, she said, her expression serious. The entire unredacted after-action report from Operation Broken Falcon. Eyewitness statements, everything. Are you sure you want to know? I looked at the small piece of plastic and metal in her hand. It was the truth. It was the weapon. It was my father's real story. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached out and took it from her. I have to, I said. The annual Gold Star family's tribute gala was Marcus Thorne's crowning achievement. It was held in the grand ballroom of the Hay Adams Hotel in D.C., a room dripping with crystal chandeliers and political power. The air smelled of money, expensive perfume, and patriotic hypocrisy. This gala was the cornerstone of his public image. Marcus Thorne, the devoted husband to a Gold Star widow, the champion of military families. Tonight, it would be the stage for his execution. I watched a live feed from a car parked across the street as Marcus took the stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. He looked every bit the statesman, his smile perfectly calibrated for the cameras. He began his speech, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity, filled with platitudes about sacrifice, honor, and the debt we owe our fallen heroes. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. He didn't know that at that very moment, Jessica Riley, sitting in a coffee shop 2 blocks away, was hitting send on an email. The recipients were the bureau chiefs and senior political reporters for every major news outlet sitting in that ballroom. Attached was a password-protected file, a digital bomb. Inside was the unredacted report on Operation Broken Falcon, a sworn affidavit from Master Sergeant Frank Miller, and a detailed summary, complete with bank records, showing how Marcus had used this information to financially control my mother. Marcus was nearing the emotional crescendo of his speech. And so we honor those who gave their all. He boomed, his arms outstretched. That was my cue. I got out of the car. I was wearing my Army service uniform, the formal dress blues, perfectly pressed, the brass on my belt buckle gleaming. My ribbons were aligned with military precision. I was no longer using a wheelchair, but I still needed a single black aluminum crutch to support my right leg. I walked through the hotel lobby, the faces of lobbyists and political aides turning to stare. I didn't look at them. My eyes were fixed on the ballroom doors. An usher tried to stop me, asking for my invitation. I just looked at him, and he stepped aside. I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The room fell silent. Not gradually, but instantly. As if a switch had been flipped, hundreds of conversations died mid-sentence. The clinking of champagne glasses stopped. Every head in that room, every camera from the local news affiliates swiveled in my direction. On stage, Marcus froze. His practiced smile froze. His words died in his throat. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly curdling into panic. I saw my mother at the head table, resplendent in a navy blue gown. The color drained from her face, leaving it a ghastly, chalk-white mask. She looked like a ghost. I didn't say a word. I just began to walk towards the stage, my pace slow and deliberate. The only sound in the vast, silent ballroom was the rhythmic, echoing thump. Click, thump, click, of my crutch and my good foot on the polished marble floor. It was the sound of a clock ticking down. It was the sound of a fuse burning. I stopped at the foot of the stage, my eyes locked on Marcus. I didn't have to say anything. Jessica's bomb had a timer. Right on cue, the massive screen behind Marcus, which had been displaying a tasteful slideshow of smiling military families, flickered and changed. The slideshow was gone. In its place, a single audio file appeared, its waveform pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, his voice filled the ballroom, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. I hope you've had time to think things over. It was the recording of my final call with him. His smug, condescending tone was unmistakable. Then came my voice, cold and clear. You attacked a soldier of the United States Army. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Before the recording even finished, the screen changed again. Now, it displayed scanned pages of the official, once classified report from Kandahar. Key phrases were highlighted in red. Civilian casualties. Error in command chain. Collateral damage assessment. At the same instant, a new sound filled the room. A synchronized vibration. It was the phones of every journalist in attendance, buzzing and lighting up with the notification of Jessica's email. The password was simple. Kandahar. Marcus's empire was collapsing in real time, on live television. He finally broke from his paralysis, frantically waving at the audio-visual technicians at the back of the room. "Shut it off! Shut that off now!" he yelled, his voice cracking, the statesman's mask completely gone. But it was too late. The screen changed one last time. It now showed a video. A pre-recorded deposition of a man in his early 40s, his face etched with a pain that time had not erased. It was the communications specialist from my father's unit. "My name is Kevin Price," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I need to tell you what really happened during Operation Broken Falcon, and how Senator Thorne used that information against Captain Wolf's family." The quiet murmurs in the ballroom erupted into a roar. Reporters were scrambling, shouting questions, their phones held up to record the chaos. Marcus stood on stage, blinking in the spotlights, a cornered animal. He grabbed the microphone, stammering, This is a disgusting, politically motivated attack, a smear campaign." But no one was listening. His words were just noise, drowned out by the thunder of the truth. I turned my gaze from him and looked at my mother. I searched her face for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the woman who had raised me. I found none. I saw only the raw, animal terror of a person who had just lost everything: her status, her security, her carefully constructed world. And me? I didn't feel the triumphant thrill I had expected. There was no joy, no satisfaction, just a profound, hollow emptiness, a cold, quiet calm. I had done what I came to do. I had spoken the truth, not for revenge, but for the record. I had defended the honor of my father, not the flawless legend, but the good, complicated man he truly was. Across the chaotic room, through the sea of panicked faces and flashing cameras, I saw Jessica standing by a service exit. She was just watching. Our eyes met. She didn't smile. She just gave me one single, solemn nod. The battle was over. The fall of the House of Thorn was swift and total. In the days following the gala, Marcus was arrested, his perfect public image incinerated in a firestorm of media coverage. He faced a litany of federal charges, from assault and witness tampering to financial crimes connected to his campaign. His political career wasn't just over, it was scorched earth. My mother, Eleanor, as an accomplice, was also charged. The beautiful Northern Virginia mansion, the stage for my assault, was seized by federal agents, its grand entrance cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape. The empire they had built on my pain and my father's secret had crumbled to dust overnight. The press painted me as a hero, a brave soldier who had exposed a corrupt politician. They called me courageous, a whistleblower. But I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt empty. The adrenaline of the fight had faded, leaving behind a deep, profound exhaustion. Winning a war, I was learning, feels a lot like surviving a shipwreck. You're alive, but you're left shivering on a desolate shore, surrounded by the wreckage of everything you once knew. A few months later, after Marcus had been denied bail and my mother had pleaded to a lesser charge, I received a letter with a county jail postmark. It was from her. She wanted to see me. Jessica advised against it. You don't owe her anything, Marie. You don't need her closure to move on. She was right, but I knew I had to go. This wasn't for her. It was for me. I needed to be the one to officially close the book on that chapter of my life. I met her in the visitor's room at the county detention center. It was a cold, soulless place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. We were separated by a thick pane of scratched plexiglass. The woman on the other side was a stranger. The elegant, coiffed Eleanor Thorne was gone. In her place was a diminished figure in a faded orange jumpsuit, her blonde hair limp and showing dark roots, her eyes sunken and hollow. She picked up the hard plastic phone receiver on her side of the glass. I picked up mine. She started crying immediately. They were messy, desperate tears. She said she was sorry. She said Marcus had manipulated her, that she had been so afraid of losing everything. She said she loved me, that she had always loved me. But the words were hollow. They had no weight. I listened, but I wasn't hearing a mother's apology. I was hearing the calculated plea of a woman trying to build a case for a lighter sentence. I was no longer her daughter. I was a character witness for her parole hearing in 5 to 7 years. The love she spoke of was a strategy, not a sentiment. I wasn't her child. I was her last resort. When she finished, her voice choked with sobs, I placed my palm flat against the cold, unyielding glass that separated us. I forgive you, I said, and the strange thing was, I meant it. The words felt true as they left my lips. I forgive you for being weak. I forgive you for being scared. But I can't forget what you did. I took a deep breath, the stale air of the room filling my lungs. I'm forgiving you not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I have to move on with my life, and I can't do that if I'm carrying all this hate around with me. It's too heavy. Her face for a moment flickered with hope. She thought this was a reconciliation. I had to extinguish that hope, for both our sakes. But you are not my mother anymore, I said, my voice gentle, but absolute. The woman who raised me wouldn't have done what you did. I can't have you in my life. Goodbye, Eleanor. I placed the receiver back in its cradle, cutting off her shocked protest. I stood up and walked away without looking back, leaving my past on the other side of that glass forever. After the visit, I didn't go home. I drove to Arlington National Cemetery. The quiet dignity of the place settled over me like a comforting blanket. I didn't go to my father's grave. I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I walked to the tomb of the unknown soldier. I stood there for over an hour, watching the sentinels from the 3rd Infantry Regiment perform their solemn, perfect ritual. 21 steps. Turn and face the tomb for 21 seconds. Turn again. 21 steps. Their movements were flawless, a testament to discipline, honor, and a dedication to something far greater than any one individual. No one knows the names of the soldiers buried there. Their individual stories are lost to time. But their legacy, of ultimate sacrifice, of anonymous service, is immortal. It is a legacy of action, not identity. And I realized my father was the same. The flawed truth of Kandahar didn't erase his sacrifice. It didn't negate the years of honorable service or the love he had for his country and for me. It simply made him human. A good man who carried the heavy burden of a mistake made in the fog of war and who had tried in his own quiet way to atone for it. His legacy, I finally understood, wasn't defined by the lie my mother told or even by the complicated truth I had uncovered. It was defined by the entirety of his life. And my legacy would not be defined by what was done to me. It would be defined by what I did next. Standing there, watching the lone soldier guard the tomb of his nameless brothers, I finally felt a sense of peace. The war was truly over. Now I had to figure out how to live in the world I'd fought to create. Standing at the tomb of the unknown soldier, I realized that legacy isn't something you inherit in a will. It's something you build with your life. After my leg fully healed, I stood at a crossroads. I had every reason to take a medical discharge, to leave the army and the painful memories behind and build a quiet civilian life. Part of me wanted that. But I chose to stay. The army, with all its flaws, was my true family. The brotherhood and sisterhood I had with my fellow soldiers was more real and dependable than the blood ties that had betrayed me. But I couldn't go back to being the same soldier I was before. My path had changed. I applied for officer candidate school. After earning my commission as a second lieutenant, I chose my assignment. I requested to be detailed to the Army's SHARP program, the Sexual Harassment and Assault Response and Prevention Branch. I wanted to become the person I had so desperately needed in the darkest days of my own crisis. Someone who would listen without judgment, who would believe without hesitation, and who would fight for the soldiers suffering in silence. The thick, jagged scar on my right shin was no longer a mark of weakness. It was a map. It was a reminder of my mission. My father's memorial fund, the one my mother had tried to poison with her lies, was still intact. It was a substantial amount of money, but I knew my dad, the real man I had come to understand, would never want me to keep it just for myself. His act of atonement for the people in Kandahar had to become a living legacy, not just a number in a bank account. So Jessica and I started a new mission together. We used the fund as seed money to establish a nonprofit organization. We called it the Wolfpack Shield. Our mission is simple. We provide free legal services, trauma counseling, and emergency shelter for military spouses and children who are victims of domestic abuse. We fight for the silent victims in a community that prizes strength and often mistakes silence for resilience. We exist to be the shield for those who feel defenseless against an enemy living inside their own home. I'll never forget our first case. A young woman, the wife of a decorated officer, came to our small office in Arlington. She had a faint purple bruise on her cheekbone, skillfully hidden under a thick layer of concealer. Her hands trembled in her lap. She was terrified, and she kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "I don't want to ruin his career." It was the mantra of the abused, the chain that kept them shackled to their tormentors. I didn't sit across from her as an army officer or the director of a nonprofit. I pulled up a chair beside her, knee to knee, and I sat there simply as Marie. And I told her my story. I told her everything. About the marble floor, my mother's coldness, the blood-stained teddy bear, and the long, lonely road back. When I finished, she looked at me. And through her tears, I saw something shift in her eyes. It was a tiny spark, but it was there. Hope. "I'm not alone," she whispered, the words barely audible. "No," I said, my voice full of a certainty that came from the deepest part of my soul. "You are not alone." In that moment, I understood what the author Viktor Frankl meant when he wrote that man's search is not for happiness, but for meaning. My life wasn't happy in the traditional sense. It was scarred, but it was, for the first time, profoundly meaningful. This morning, I went for a run along the Potomac River. The air was cool and crisp, and the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink behind the Washington Monument. As I ran, my right leg felt strong and sure beneath me. I no longer feel the burning hatred for Marcus or the hollow ache of my mother's betrayal. They are just ghosts now, characters in a chapter of my life that has long since ended. Their power over me is gone. My life is full now. My family is Jessica, who argues with me about football on Sundays. It's my platoon, the young soldiers I lead and protect. It's the women and children of the Wolfpack Shield, whose courage inspires me every single day. My father left me a legacy of honor. It was a foundation. But I have built a new legacy on top of it, brick by painful brick. A legacy of healing, a legacy of hope. My name is Marie Wolf. I am a survivor, I am a soldier, and my story is just beginning. Thank you for listening to my journey. Every survivor has a story, and more importantly, a legacy they are building every single day. If this story resonated with you, I want you to leave a comment with just one word: legacy. It's a quiet promise to yourself and to this community that your story isn't defined by your past, but by what you choose to build next. Please like this video to help it reach others who might need to hear they are not alone, and subscribe for more stories of strength and survival. Stay strong,